So welcome again. Tonight we're coming, believe it or not, to our last talk on shame. And it is all going to be positive this week. It's going to be healing shame. And last week we started healing shame, and it was actually kind of painful, but it was part of the healing process is the self-awareness. So let me begin by saying this. One of the questions that I get asked all the time when people start realizing what shame is they ask me, am I ever going to get over this? Will I ever heal from shame? And what they're hoping I'll do is say, yes, on this date in 2020, you will be over your shame. And what they are really realizing, though, as they get to understand shame is how deeply rooted it is, how much it affects every part of their life. And so they begin to realize this is going to be a lifetime journey. That you have thousands of triggers. You have all kinds of things that get kicked into motion once you're triggered. And so what you see when you start healing and growing is a bunch of different things. You get triggered less, first of all. And if you're dealing with the shame once it's triggered, if you deal with it in a healthy way, then you don't get triggered as often in that same area. So you'll start getting triggered less. And then if you're healing, the triggers become less intense. And then you're able to process through them more quickly. So currently it could be that once your shame is triggered, you're wiped out for 2 days in your head and in all your dark places. As you heal and grow, you can begin to work through stuff in 5 minutes, an hour, and you become kind of amazed at how quickly you get through stuff. So it is possible to make lots of healing steps forward, but probably the journey will go on at some level, to some degree, for the rest of your life. But I don't want that to be discouraging, because as you start to feel the healing, you'll be surprised at how much better you feel overall. So you will begin to experience benefits very quickly as you begin to deal with it. Part of what determines how long the journey is going to be is how much shame is there in your life, number one. How many triggers do you have? And how safe are your relationships? You can't heal from shame in an unsafe environment. So you need to have safe people, safe environment, or else if you're with unsafe people, you just keep getting shame messages. So the better you're able to have safe people, the faster you can heal from shame. Next thing I want you to understand is this. The initial healing from shame is very real, but it's very fragile. Some of you might have this experience. You've been working on yourself. Let's say you've been coming to Finding Freedom, React, and you're starting to feel better about yourself. You're actually starting to respect yourself and accept yourself, and you're feeling really good, and then you go and spend the day with mom. And you come there going, I guess I never learned anything. I'm right back to feeling crappy about myself. And the point is this. You grew, but that growth is fragile. It's like new leaves on a brand new baby plant. And the slightest thing can destroy them. So part of what you have to do in recovery is really set boundaries to protect that growth so it can solidify and become stronger and stronger. So that is just up front that you need to be aware of. Okay, so I want to give you the 4 steps of healing that we've talked about so far. And you may not have realized I was throwing some of these in as we went along in the first 5 talks. But over there, every talk, there's been an element of self-awareness. And what we focused on last week is that to heal from shame, you have to take this thing that's been operating at a subconscious level and bring it to the conscious level so you understand how you're triggered, what you do when you're triggered. Then you can change it once you get it to that conscious level. So self-awareness is the first thing. Second thing, 2 weeks ago we talked about the lies we believe about ourselves, both about our value and about what gives us value. And so now you begin to replace those lies with the truth. And we talked about that and what it means to respect somebody else and the different types of respect. We've talked about all of that. So the point was this: in dealing with shame, there is a cognitive part. There's a replacing lies with truth part, but it's not the only part. There's an emotional part and lots of that we're going to get to. The other thing that we saw is in your brain, you have a limbic system that has become it speaks a lot of lies to you based on how you feel. And shame is a negative feeling. And so your limbic brain says, you're not worth anything. You shouldn't respect yourself. You deserve to fail, blah, 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 blah. But now you've got a cortex that disagrees with your limbic brain. So you have a battle going on in your brain between your limbic brain and your cortex brain. And so the goal of recovery is that your cortex brain trumps your limbic brain. So when shame gets triggered, limbic gets fired up and it wants to trump your cortex. And so what you're doing in healing is saying, shut up, limbic brain. Here is the truth. I'm not listening to the distorted stuff you tell me, and it feels like truth, but I know it's a lie. And now I'm going to respond and act on my cortex, not on my limbic brain. And then the other piece that we talked about is beginning to have positive affirmations about yourself that you know are the truth about your value, about who you are. So that's part of that cognitive piece. The third one that we've talked about with that is developing a healthy value system. So shame says, I have no internal value. All my value comes from what I do or from my external world. And so now what you have to do in healing shame is saying, I can't base my value on what I do or my external world, because what happens if that changes and I'm no longer able to do it? I have to find my value in my internal world, my inherent value. And that, all of these are a process. All of these don't happen overnight, but they are stuff that you begin to work on and you begin to experience the changes. So getting the right value system. Now, one thing I want to add to that is we talked about sometimes there's a healthy part of getting value from what I do. But if that's the only source of what makes me feel valuable, then it's going to lead me astray. So I need to be serving in some capacity, but I have to get value from all kinds of other healthy things, not just from service. So that was the third one. The fourth one, if I have value, I treat myself with respect. My limbic brain says I don't feel valuable, so I'll treat myself by beating myself up, putting myself down. Cortex says, no, I have value, so I will treat myself with value, even though I don't feel like I have value. So you're acting your way to new, healthier feelings. You're saying, I have value, treat myself that way regardless of how I feel. And that is the challenge in dealing with shame. You are choosing to act on what you know is the truth, even though you don't feel it's that way. So you're fighting your feelings by choosing to act by treating yourself with respect. And that can be some of the hardest stuff to do. Treat yourself with respect. So bottom line is, as you treat yourself with respect, you start to feel more respect for yourself. You start to feel like you can require others to have to treat you with respect. You don't have to put up with their disrespect. And that creates even greater growth for you in dealing with shame. So those four we've kind of covered. Now I'm going to bomb my way right through a whole bunch of other ones. Some are we could go for a whole session on them. I'm giving you the Coles notes, but it's really key, important stuff. So the next one is accepting yourself. Now, here's what I want you to understand. When I first started working in the counseling world 30 years ago, what was being talked about all the time was, You got to love yourself. Low self-esteem was on everybody's radar, and you got to love yourself. But what they were saying was, you have to try to create feelings of love for yourself. And what I found in working with people with tons of shame, they couldn't stir up good feelings to themselves. So if they went to a workshop and they said, look in the mirror and tell yourself you love you and feel all warm and fuzzy to yourself, they're going, rolling their eyes, going, who is this quack job that's running this class? Because I can't stir up any positive feelings. And so I said, okay, for deeply shamed people, that does not work initially. Where they have to start is not try to get warm feelings to themselves. They have to start by saying, I accept me. I choose to accept the body I was given. I choose to accept the personality I was given. And what does shame say? I don't like who I am. Because I think that's the reason I've been neglected and abandoned. So I wish I wasn't a shy, quiet person. I wish I was the outgoing leader that was funny all the time. And you wished for a different personality. You wished for a different face, all those different things. You start by making a choice. I choose to accept this package. I choose to accept the way I was born. Now that is easier said than done, because you've never done that before. And so what's going to happen is, once you start to want to get down on yourself because you're feeling your shyness and nobody's wanting to talk to you because you want to sit in a corner all by yourself, you go, you know what? I'm shy. Instead of seeing that as just a negative, I wonder if there's positives from being shy. And you think about it from a positive perspective. So let me give you this. When I was young, I was super shy. I was super analytical. And I didn't like that about myself, because I didn't relate to people my own age. They wanted to talk about stupid things, about the latest girl that everybody was excited about. And I wanted to talk about deeper stuff, and none of them were interested. And so I just didn't connect. And I wished I was something different. And then at some point I thought, you know what? I wonder if there's benefits in being this shy thinker. And I began to look at it from those eyes. And you realize I would never be effective at what I do today if I wasn't a shy thinker. So I began to realize being shy has a lot of positives that outgoing people don't have. And so those are the things that you begin to think about. Okay, next one, not only are you accepting who you are, you also need to accept your past. So what happens with shame is, I hate my upbringing. I wish I didn't have it. I wish I had a whole different set of circumstances. And you can stay in that place of I wish, or if only, for the rest of your life. Or you can come to a point where you say, I can't go back and change anything. So instead of seeing it as all bad, I wonder what I could learn from it that would make me a better person. Instead of just being bitter and resentful about it, let's learn the lessons from it. You want to know what you'll find? You'll learn lessons from your past that people who don't have your past will never learn. And you will gain strengths from that they will never get based on their past. And so at some point, you say, I accept me and I accept my upbringing. As crappy as it was, I choose to accept it. Third thing you have to accept, healing is a slow journey. And it is a messy journey. So everybody that comes into recovery wants the silver bullet that is going to be the magic pill that they take and they're fixed. And they never struggle again. I was talking with somebody today who works with people that are in kind of the most severe federal penitentiaries for the most severe crimes. They all want to get well. Not all, but many want to get well. As long as they don't have to work very hard at it. As long as it's easy. As long as it doesn't require much change. That's what they want. So they all say, I want to get better. I just don't want to do the work of getting better. So here's what I do with clients this little graph. This is what growth in dealing with shame looks like. You make some progress, you get triggered, fall flat on your face. What happens when you fall flat on your face? You walk around and say, I guess I didn't learn anything, I'm so stupid. And you feed your own shame and you beat yourself up. Wrong response, but that's the normal response. So eventually you pick yourself back up and you start working again and you start making more progress, get triggered, fall flat in your face. And that goes like that for a long time. But what I want you to see is that the overall progression of the graph is you're getting higher and higher. You're growing. So think of it this way. When you have a baby that's getting to that 1-year-old mark and they take their first step, do you go, you fell on your face? You're a failure. You should be ashamed of yourself. No, you're applauding. Going, way to go, get back up, try that again. And you don't fault them, you don't judge them, you don't criticize them. You realize that to learn such an important skill like walking, which I'm told takes several hundred muscles within the body to get all figured out how to stay balanced, you know that takes a lot of falling on your face. And what you're hoping is that over time, they'll fall less and less and walk more and more, and then they'll eventually run. That's recovery. You are learning a whole new set of skills that is using muscles and abilities and brain circuits that are brand new, that you've never used before. You're not going to get it perfectly the first time. If you don't accept that the journey's like this, you are going to beat yourself up and feed your shame every time you fall on your face. And you will not progress very far. So accepting the nature of the journey is important. Now let me add one piece to this. The problem with complex trauma is that failure becomes something that the person sees as only bad. Failure never led to anything good, just to pain and punishment. But what was the actual design of failure? It was positive. It was to be an example that you could learn from. So failure was to be turned into a positive. That was the design. But if you come from a background where failure was always bad and always was painful, you're afraid of failure. And so what you're doing in recovery is changing your thinking there and saying, okay, I'm going to fall on my face. That's not the end of the world. That doesn't mean I'm a total failure. That means I now have something I can learn from so I don't repeat that again. And it turns into a positive learning experience. Number 8, and you're going to see these all begin to overlap a little bit, but you have to forgive yourself for what you've done in the past. And when you fail today, you have to deal with it, change, and forgive yourself. So what happens for a child that comes out of complex trauma? When you do something wrong, there's no way to fix it. You get punished for it, you get thrown in your face, and so you learn that if you fail, beat yourself up, get down on yourself. That's how you were parented. That's how you now parent yourself. That feeds shame. Now let me take it a step further. You have done a lot of things that you're greatly ashamed of, stuff that has hurt your children and created trauma in them. You made a lot of mistakes in your teens and 20s that you wish you could redo and take back. But you have to, with complex trauma, go back to the child who's living in danger that they cannot resolve. They cannot fix. They cannot get out of to a healthy place. What was their only solution? Fight, flight, freeze. Survival. The very tools needed to fight, flight, freeze, lying, not trusting, wearing masks, they messed up your life. But don't punish the child for trying to survive. Don't punish the child for using the only tools they had available to survive. You can't go back and change that child's decisions, so don't punish them. Don't punish yourself for those survival decisions. You can change them now, and you need to do that, but stop beating yourself up for the things you did to survive. That is the point I want you to get. Now let me take it further. Many people think of forgiveness as a feeling, a limbic brain thing. I'll feel or I'll forgive myself when I feel that I've paid for my crimes. Well, guess when that's going to happen? Never. Because you'll keep beating yourself up, which will lead to more failure, which will lead to more beating yourself up, etc. It becomes a vicious cycle that is spiraling downhill. So what you have to do is this. I choose to forgive myself. And what that means is if I fail or if I have a memory of a failure, instead of going to the negative tapes in my head where I beat myself up, I say, no, not going there. I forgive myself. I choose to change. I choose to learn from that and become better because of it, but I'm not going to go beating myself up. That's what forgiveness is in forgiving yourself. Absolutely essential if you're going to deal with your shame. Now, the next two are tied together. Remember, we said that shame is a child looking into the mirrors of the people in their life. And the people of significance in their life reflect back to them by what they say and do the value of the child, who the child is. So if the child's neglected and abused and abandoned, what's being reflected back to them is you're a zero. You're not worth love. You don't have value. So those are the mirrors of their life, but they're all distorted mirrors. So what you have to do now, if you want to heal your shame, is you got to surround yourself with more accurate mirrors. People that will reflect back to you a more accurate picture of your value, of who you are, that you are lovable, that you are significant. But then with that, you need boundaries with unhealthy mirrors. So you might have to say, I can't hang around with my mom for now, because the growth and the healing is too fragile. And if I spend too much time with her, it's going to get mowed down and crushed. So I'm going to need some boundaries with the distorted mirrors of my life. You want to know that that's one of the hardest parts of recovery for a lot of people. You want to know what many people are still looking for and they don't even realize it, even though they might be 30, 40, or 50 years old? They're still longing for mom and dad to validate them. So every time they grow, which is going to happen as you deal with your shame, guess who they want to go tell about it? Mom and dad. So mom and dad will go, we're so proud of you. Usually doesn't happen that way. And you go running to mom and dad and you say, I'm growing. Here's what's happening. And they'll think you're better than us, do you? And they mow you right back down. And you're crushed again. So you have to realize, if I keep looking to them to validate me, I'm never going to heal beyond a certain point. I need boundaries with those kind of people. And it's usually family members that need them the most until I get strong enough to deal with it. And I need to find healthy mirrors who give me good validation. And I need to learn to validate myself. So boundaries with mirrors is crucial. Okay? So that's not something you do internally. That's saying other people still influence my shame. And so I have to have a system in place to protect myself from the wrong ones. Next one. Connect with healthier people. Now, I'm not just saying have healthier people as your mirrors. What I mean is this. Shame was caused by not being able to connect at an intimate level with people. And so you've concluded that the reason people didn't connect with you is because you weren't good enough. It was your fault. And that creates the shame. A huge part of healing shame is connecting in a healthy way with safe people. Do you want to know the fear of a shame-based person is? I'm going to develop a relationship and I'm going to start become more authentic. I'm going to take my masks away. I'm going to start to open up. And then you get to some doozy secret. And then you share it and you go, oh, they're probably judging me. I can never face them again. And you go to that place. You want to know what usually happens when you do that? If you're with healthy people, they go, you go through that? I went through that. Wow, it's so good to have somebody that understands. And you go, I wasn't judged. I was loved. I was accepted. I'm respected. And you heal a little bit more. So part of connecting with people is opening up, not being judged, but then developing conversations and interactions that go to the real stuff in your life. Okay, next one. We're flying along. Begin to learn about yourself. What does shame do to a person? You don't like who you are. You try to become somebody else. Now when you start to heal, you go, I don't know who I am. I don't know if I'm outgoing. I don't know if I'm shy. I don't know if I'm funny. I don't know if I'm serious. I don't know who I am. Don't know if I'm good at sports. I don't know if I'm good at administration. Total blank. You know all the roles you played. You know all the masks that you wore, but you're not sure who you really are. Do things that help you find that out. Take personality type tests. Read books on that. Begin to explore what interests me. Maybe I'll take guitar lessons. Maybe I'll try an art class. Maybe I'll try martial arts, whatever. Try different things to find out what you're good at. Now, here's what you have to understand. What does shame do when you go to try a new thing? Uh-oh, what happens if I'm not good at it and I look stupid? Well, I better not risk trying anything. So in order to get to know yourself, you got to push through shame and risk failing and looking stupid and moving out of your comfort zone. But as you do that, you realize nobody killed me and I didn't die. And I actually grew from that. And you get more courage to keep doing it. Next one, grieve your past. So I talked about accepting your past, but that doesn't mean you're happy about your past. It means there's a lot of crap that you have to grieve. So a couple things that I want you to think about. One of the things that you're grieving with shame is you didn't get a healthy childhood that you should have got. So you're grieving something you never had, but you should have had. So you've lost something that you've never had, but you've lost something you should have had. And so part of what happens as people get to know about complex trauma and their shame is they begin to realize how much their childhood affected them. And they start to go, I wish I had a different childhood. I wish I didn't go through that. And then they start grieving what they didn't have. Secondly, you grieve the many losses that you did have. The loss of connection, the loss of certain friendships, the loss of certain things because of choices by family or yourself. So there's a grieving part that is part of the healing process. Next one, you have to have a clean conscience. So what we talked about in the first talk was this. Guilt is about what I do. Shame is about who I am. The problem with complex trauma is when you do something bad, they say you are bad. So they blend guilt and shame. And so what happens now when you fail, you do something morally wrong, you tell a lie, you cheat, whatever, it feeds your shame. And you walk around saying, not only did I fail, I'm a failure. And it feeds your shame. So, if you do something morally wrong and your conscience bothers you, clean it up right away. Because if you don't, it's going to keep bugging you and it gradually is going to pull you into deeper shame. So that becomes an important piece. Next one, service. And what I want to say about this is, for many people, service is important in finding out what I'm good at, what I can offer people, and it helps me heal to realize I have something to offer. But for some people, it's very dangerous, because if you got your validation as a child from helping everybody, and you were the perfect little servant around the house, and that's where your validation came from, to step back into a service role could really mess you up. Because it could pull you back into looking for validation, which comes like a drug. So if that was part of your validation growing up, be very careful as you get into service. Don't go there unless people in your life think you're ready for it. Because it's very easy to get there, and then once you're there, you stop working on yourself, you get wrapped up in all that you're doing, and then if you're struggling, you're afraid to say anything, because now everybody's looking up to you, and it becomes a disaster. Next one, many people find there's a value in healing shame in the spiritual thing, in a higher power, in a new belief system that is a better definition of happiness, of value, of what makes life work. All of that can be important. If you do have God or a higher power, that becomes for you a mirror that you believe is the most accurate mirror in the world, and that tells you the truth about yourself better than anybody else. So that one is important. Next one, humility versus humiliation. Now, here's what I want you to understand. A lot of people, cultures, religious people, have defined humility as shame. And I want you to understand that. If you go to many places and ask them to define humility, guess what they'll say? You're worse than everybody. You never walk around and say, I accomplished something. You see yourself as less than. And so if you ever feel good about yourself, shame on you, you're proud. You should be walking around saying, I'm a nobody, I'm no good. And that's how they define humility. Do you realize that is the wrong definition? And if you're going to heal from shame, you need the right definition of humility. And the right definition of humility is this: you see yourself accurately. And what does it mean to see yourself accurately? I'm not better than or worse than anybody. Humans, we're a level playing field. We all have equal value. Secondly, humility says, I want to learn. I want to keep growing. I don't want to get locked into this place where I can't risk trying anything for fear of failure, or I can never be wrong because I might be humiliated. So the fear of people from complex trauma is, if I humble myself, I will get humiliated. And humiliated was terrible. Humility is totally different. It is seeing myself accurately. It is being open to change, to growth, to learning. And that is absolutely essential if you're going to heal shame. Now, the next one is inner child. Now, we spend a lot of time at React. Let me just say a few things. Inner child, for a lot of people, they go, oh, that's hokey. That's just weird. What are you going to ask me to do? So here's how I talk about it. I think everybody that I deal with from complex trauma, if I say, do you still sense there's a little child in you somewhere? They all agree. And then I go, okay, let's just focus on that little child inside of you, which is a younger you. What emotions is that child feeling? And they'll go, wow, they're hurt, they're sad, they're angry, they're full of fear, they got tons of shame, and they hate themselves. I say, okay, so that child, that inner you, that little you, has nothing but negative emotions. How does that child look physically? They got their head down, they're curled up in a fetal position, They can't look at people in the eye. They can define and describe that child. Okay, how does that child feel about you, the adult? Ooh, he doesn't trust me. Why? Because I abandoned that child. I hated that part of me. I didn't want anything to do with that part of me. I was impatient with that part of me. I was embarrassed by that part of me. Okay, so that child feels abandoned by you and doesn't trust you. But that child is you. It's a part of you. So healing from shame is taking that part of you that you've rejected and been embarrassed by and accepting it and nurturing it so that it feels loved and it can heal and become part of the adult you. So that's what this is about. So then I say, okay, let's just say one of your biological children spilled their milk or fell off their bike and tore a hole in their brand new pair of pants. What would you do to that child as they're crying and angry at themselves? You would hug them. You'd say, it's okay, it's just things, etc. You would nurture them and comfort them. I go, what happens if your little child fell off their bike and messed stuff up? I would be in that child's face, criticizing them, calling them down. So here's what I want you to understand. You parent your biological child differently than you parent yourself. You're loving and nurturing and comforting and understanding to your biological children because you know what shame-based parenting did to you, but yet when you parent yourself, you still use shame-based parenting. People don't grow from shame or heal from shame until they parent themselves in a loving, nurturing way. And that starts with that little part of you that you've always been embarrassed by. So let me just read this. It came out recently. I found it. It says, toxic shame has its root in childhood, abandonment, abuse, and trauma. And you're familiar with all that. As such, feeling better will almost always go back to accessing your childhood self, the very part of you that was confronted with the trauma in the first place. Learning how to interact with and care for your younger self is called inner child work, and there are a number of reasons why this practice is powerful. Firstly, inner child work helps you access feelings that you have repressed and disassociated from in an attempt to protect yourself as a child. By re-experiencing these emotions, you'll be able to release them from your body and mind and generate deep healing. So you connect emotionally. Secondly, inner child work is tremendously insightful and revealing. Often some of the most important questions you've carried consciously or subconsciously are answered while doing inner child work. And thirdly, inner child work is learning self-compassion in action. When you learn how to reparent your inner child, you develop a deep, strong connection with yourself, which has a ripple effect on the rest of your life. So what's inner child work? Reparenting yourself, learning to parent yourself with compassion, learning to stop beating up and rejecting and abandoning yourself. Final point, number 19, be patient. It takes time. I want to do something a little bit different. So what we've been doing with the shame piece is we looked at the people God loved, and we saw some pretty messed up people that he loved, and we looked at a couple stories. Then we looked at what God says about us, and we went through all the different Bible verses where God describes who we are. Tonight I want to come at it from a different way that the Bible comes at it. So it is about this. Psalm chapter 8 says, when I look at the night sky, so just picture yourself, let's say outside of the city limits in a winter night, looking up, and you see the stars, you see the northern lights dancing in the north. So when I look at the night sky and I see the works of your fingers, the moon and the stars you set in place, what you end up going is, wow, God is so big. God is so amazing. Why would God be concerned about little old me? He's got stars and galaxies to take care of. He's got all of this stuff to keep on course. He's probably too busy for me. And so what he says is, when I look at this greatness of God and the creation that he made, what are mere mortals that you should think about them, human beings that you should care for them? And the point is, I'm overwhelmed by the fact that such a big God cares about somebody so little. And so what happens in the Bible on a number of occasions, and I put a couple in the book of Job and Isaiah 40, is it purposely tries to help us think about how big God is. So in Isaiah 40, it says, think of the things in creation that cause you to stand in awe. So looking up at the stars, and it says, oh, those are just a small little thing to God. Standing and seeing mountains for the first time, you feel so small, you're just overwhelmed with awe. It says, oh, God can just put all of that on a scale. It's just like dust. And then seeing the ocean and the broadness and the expanse of it, you just feel this sense of awe. And he says, oh, that's just a drop in a bucket. That's how big God is. So if you look at the things in creation that cause you to stand in awe of God, and then you go, but those are just tiny to God. They're almost insignificant to God. Then how big is God? And when you say, how big is God? Then how amazing that he cares about me. And that he spends time with me and he sees value in me. So what I want to do tonight is have you to think about the ocean. I love doing this. I have this fear of the ocean. I got caught in a riptide once that scared me to death, and I thought I was going to drown. So I've learned a healthy fear of the ocean, but I love walking by the ocean. I love being on a cruise ship on the ocean, the bigness, the peacefulness, all of those things. So I want you to think about the amazing design that the ocean has in the big picture of our world. And I hope what you'll see is this amazing designer who has designed with great intricacy an ocean that fulfills all kinds of different functions and that just leaves you going, wow. Okay? So just to give you one thought, you're going to put your thinking caps on with this. Okay. Stop and think of every river that goes into the ocean. So you've got the Mississippi River, you got the Amazon River, you keep on going. Okay, how many gallons an hour would be going into the ocean? Do you realize that there's no rivers going out of the ocean? So God had to design an evaporation rate that would match the water coming in. Because if you evaporated too fast, then the ocean would get smaller and smaller. If he didn't evaporate fast enough, the ocean would begin to take over the world. You see? So the balance between water coming in and water being evaporated is just amazing when you start to think about who designed that. That is quite something. And then the ocean's got to be big enough to allow for the odd glacier to melt, or the odd flood to add extra water that year, and the ocean can absorb it because it's big enough, okay? So that's kind of where we're going to go. So let me just give you some very basic information about the oceans. They cover 75% of our Earth's surface. They're the least explored part of our world. They figure they've probably explored less than 5% of the ocean. That's how big it is, unexplored territory. It holds 97% of the world's water. So if you look at all the lakes, the Great Lakes, Lake Winnipeg, Lake Manitoba, all of those added up with all of the rivers, that's only 3% of the water in the world. The other 97% is in the oceans. I found the next one interesting. Half of our world's population lives within 50 miles of the coastline. That's how close we are to the ocean. That's how much important it is to life. $500 billion a year of business comes from the fish of the ocean, the other parts of the ocean, the chemicals, etc. So it is an essential piece of our creation on all kinds of different levels. So the amount of food it provides, understand 1 billion of the people of the world rely on the fish of the ocean as their major food source. That's how dependent they are. 10% of the protein intake in our world comes from the fish of the oceans. More fish are harvested than cattle, pigs, sheep, poultry, and eggs combined. That's the ocean. So it is a massive food source. Okay? Next, how important is it? The ocean is the thing that moderates the temperature of our world. So why don't we boil? Why don't we freeze? Thank the ocean for that. It plays a key role. It absorbs heat and cold. It absorbs the sun's rays and the heat from them. And if you didn't know, there are rivers at the bottom of the ocean that move the water around. So when we go to Florida, there's the Gulf Stream that goes up the east coast of the United States and Canada. That is a deep underwater river that rushes north and carries the warm southern water up into the North Atlantic, and it regulates the temperatures of the ocean and then of the climates of the land. So it becomes a big part of that. Do you realize that if we didn't have oceans, we wouldn't have mountains? I didn't really know that till a while ago. So how did mountains happen? You got two continental plates that collide and get pushed up. Why don't they slide back down? Because when they got pushed up, oceans landed on what was there, and the oceans hold the mountains up. So that is another thing that you maybe didn't know. It is the source of all fresh water. So over 1,000 cubic kilometers of water evaporate from the ocean every day. 1,000 kilometers up, down, and deep of water evaporate from the ocean every day. That is a lot of water. And then that gets distributed as fresh water in rain and snow. So the way we get fresh water is not it's magically produced. It comes from salt water in the ocean that evaporates and then creates. So there's that beautiful system in place. All of our fresh water ultimately is dependent on the ocean. 60 chemicals come from the ocean. Many that can't be found anywhere else on land. So we're dependent on a lot of that. 50% of the oxygen of the world doesn't come from the Amazon rainforest. It comes from the ocean. It is the biggest supplier of oxygen, but it is also the greatest user of carbon dioxide. And do you want to know what's greater than the Amazon forest? Is the underwater kelp forests, seaweed forests of the oceans that take in all the carbon dioxide and release oxygen. So the ocean plays a huge role in absorbing our carbon dioxide and providing oxygen for us. Every time a wave crests, it releases oxygen from the water into the air. So waves become a part of that. And then the algae, the plankton, all of those things in the water absorb the carbon dioxide. So it keeps us alive. Okay, now, this is the fun part. We've talked about all of the water going into the ocean, so there has to be an evaporation. But I want you to think of something else. If all the water goes into the ocean and nothing goes out of the ocean, what happens when you get water that doesn't have an exit? It gets stagnant. Water that just sits without any movement gets stagnant. What happens with stagnant water? It loses its oxygen and it gets full of diseases. So God's got a problem. How in the world is he going to keep this body of water that has no exits from becoming stagnant. Absolutely fascinating. So what is one of the things that we use today to filter water? Sand and charcoal. So you want to know what God did? He says, I'm going to put sandy shores around all the oceans. Then I'm going to put this moon in the sky, and guess what it's going to do? It's going to pull the whole ocean one way, and then the other way, called tides, twice a day. And guess what's going to happen when the tide comes in and the tide goes out? They're going to wash up on the sand and get filtered. And then the tide goes the other way, they're going to get washed up on the sand and get filtered. What a great filter system. Who would have thought of that? But God pulled that off. And then he put these plants in the water, and I talked about the underwater rivers. But what happens is, as these underwater rivers hit the mountains, so there's mountains bigger than our tallest land mountains. There's mountains bigger than that under the water that are totally buried by water. So the rivers hit these and it dries everything up and stirs up. And then every time storms come, they further the filtering process. They stir up stuff so that it can get cleaned. All of those things keep the oceans from becoming stagnant, keep them clean, and keep oxygen happening in them. The next piece that has to happen if this is going to work, you got to have plants that can absorb the carbon dioxide and release oxygen, so they have to be able to get the sun's rays. So water has to be transparent. It can look blue, but the sun has to be able to penetrate it to a depth so that the plants can get the benefit of the sun's rays so they can grow and do all the important things that they do. Okay, next thing, if you're going to get plants to grow, they need fertilizer. Do you realize that when an orca whale takes a poop, it's 150 pounds at a time of poop? That's a lot of fertilizer bags in that one little poop. So guess what God built into this ocean? Fish who need to poop. And now you're fertilizing all of the plants of the ocean in a beautiful way. Some of you are just going to let that sink in a little bit. You're going to enjoy that one. Tell your kids. You know how big an orca's poop is? All of that. Okay. I digress. Next one. Now you got the problem of everything sinks to the bottom, and the ocean is over 5 miles deep in places. All of those nutrients are going to settle into the bottom. Plants are up close to the top. How do you get that up to the plants? So again, those underwater rivers hit the mountains and they drive all the water to the top. So there's this constant cycling of water that takes place thanks to these deep underwater rivers, and then the storm stirs everything up. Okay, now you got one other problem. Think of science in high school. What are the three different forms of a substance? You have a solid, a liquid, and a gas. Remember that? Okay, so if you take any substance, solid is the heaviest and the smallest. Once it expands to a liquid, it gets bigger. And once it expands to a gas, it gets bigger. Follow? Okay, now let's take water. If water turned to ice as a solid, and it followed the path of all other solids, it would get heavier and smaller and would sink. What would happen to all the fish in the world if in the winter all the ice sank? We would have no fish. So if we're going to have fish stay alive in the winter, God's going to have to do solids, liquids, and gases different than with water than with other types of substances. So guess what happens when water water freezes? It expands and it floats. The exact thing necessary to keep fish alive. Now, doesn't it take a genius to design a system like that? So if you want to read Job 26, it goes through creating the universe, the water, the oceans, all of that. And then it says this: these are but a whisper of God's power. In other words, this is just the smallest little piece of God's power. But then it goes on to say, but the thunder of his power, who can begin to know that? If we can hardly get our minds around a whisper of God's power, just think if we understood perfectly the greatness of God's power, we just wouldn't have a brain that could fathom it. And so that takes us back to Psalm 8. When I think of this kind of great God with this genius, brilliant mind that can design a system that keeps life happening on planet Earth and factors in 100 different things, that is a great big God. The fact that he even cares about me and notices me and wants a relationship with me, that is mind-boggling. And that becomes one of the greatest healers of shame.